You're good to go.
Okay. So my name's John McLeod, and I worked with a group of community leaders over the summer to figure out how we could use emerging technology to communicate a story about a community. So we put together a team of people. Here's a picture of some of them, most of the people who were staff or leaders in the project, where we worked with Marin City youth to visualize in virtual reality and through hip hop music a project about working in the shipyards during World War II. And so that's a little background of what it is. We're going to show you a video, and then each of the participants are going to talk about their section. We have 3 sections, one about immersive storytelling, one about hip hop music creation, and one about character animation in VR. And so all those pieces were pulled together to become into a curriculum and a media that can be distributed through libraries using VR headsets and music. So it's something we worked with Cree in California to be part of their program. I don't know, Chantel, are you with us? No, Chantel is, maybe she'll join us later. So maybe you could talk a little bit about the community, Jahi, and the youth, the creatives.
Sure. Thank you all for being here today. This project is based in Marin City, California, which is a part of Marin County. And the wonderful thing about this story is that it actually is lifting up the founders of Marin City, because when we dug into the story and we found that, African Americans, for example, did the migration west. And when they came out to the Bay Area, they really came with their entire lives, and they really started their lives over in response to after Pearl Harbor and World War II and working at the Marin shipyards. And since then, there are 8 generations of African-American families that are still in Marin City. And some of the characters that we will talk about, some of their descendants are also still in Marin City as well, too. So this project over the summer had an opportunity to bring Marin City youth and youth from the Bay Area together. And it's also now being a part of what we call Marin City 80, which is it's a variety of events leading up to the 80th birthday of Marin City on Labor Day of 2022. So that's a quick little snapshot about Marin City and the connection to the project, and I'll have more to share later.
Okay, we're going to go look at, go to the next slide. Here we go.
Right. I'm Anita Gail Jones, and as a visual artist, a writer, and an oral tradition storyteller, my creative process is informed by all 3 of those disciplines. Humans are story animals. We are made of stories, and story is survival. These kids had nothing to connect with that. And then we realized we had a very big thing that connected us, and that was the pandemic. So we did an iceberg analogy showing how World War II was like an iceberg and the coronavirus pandemic was like that. And it was really kind of amazing to watch the kids just connecting the things that were the same. Things we did first was to create this board, a storyboard behind the 4 characters, and how much time we had for each character and who the character was talking to. 1 dialogue and 2 monologues and 3 pieces of narration. To me, that was very exciting because we were creating it, not only creating the content, but creating the process.
I've been working on a story chart, so pretty much coming up with the script and just other details of the Marin ship and how it was working on the shipyard and all that, and like different obstacles that people had to overcome.
I'm Tim Bartolf, and I designed and facilitated a 3D modeling for VR track, where students learn the full development pipeline for creating 3D models in real-time environments. In the track, students learn Blender 2.9 and Photoshop, as well as a host of other conceptual knowledge that they can take to any 3D art software. This was a unique opportunity to rediscover marginalized history through the power of interdisciplinary cooperation. With the way out of no way, we are only just beginning to see what's possible when we integrate this approach with emerging technology.
Hi, I'm Leslie Pele.
I'm an animator for film, gaming, and virtual reality. I am responsible for the animation of the 3D modeling track. I greatly enjoyed introducing the youth to the world of real-time animation using industry-standard 3D animation software and a powerful game engine. The students implemented their voices to the narration of the 4 historical characters in the project, A Way Out of No Way, to bring the 4 3D computer-generated characters to life in a production setting. The collaboration of the 3 tracks gives a visual voice to XR Lost Stories.
Peace, everybody. My name is Jahi from XR Lost Stories. The title of our project is called A Way Out of No Way, and the young people from Marin City and other parts of the Bay that supported the project, we've given them the title of the Marinovators. I was responsible for helping to produce and co-write the soundtrack of the songs that uplift 4 main characters, Mr. Joseph James, Reverend Leon Samuels, Miss Annie Smalls, and Miss Rodessa Battle.
So today, while working on the soundtrack track, I basically wrote 4 bars of music, which is fun. I've never done that before.
Equal rights, equal pay, equal fights, equal ways, set up in an equal ways, understand, please behave. Equal treatment, equal rights, equal money, equal treatment, equal rights, equal money, equal life.
Okay, so that's a brief overview of what we did this summer in the course of, what was it, 3 weeks. We'd broken up into 3 different groups, and students would be in different areas of each time. But I'm wondering, Anita, if you could talk a little bit more about what that process was like to come up with the immersive storytelling to be used for the characters in the animations.
Yes, sure. Can everybody hear me okay? You can hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So it was, we had to work very fast. That was the main part of it. We were designing content, doing a lot of research and synthesizing a lot of historical information, both from World War II and from Marin City, and how those two interacted together with the Marin ship, the building of Marin ships. So the young people had to do a lot of research. But the really exciting part was that not only were we designing the story and figuring out how the story would roll out, how these characters would relate to each other, we also had to come up with a process. We were designing the process and the content from scratch, which was quite an undertaking, but it was very exciting to see the young folks rise to the occasion. And one of the things that was most interesting was trying to find a way into the story and how these young people were going to relate to something that happened 70 years ago, because it was very much something they had not experienced. They had not been through war. They had not had this kind of an experience yet. So quite quickly, we realized that because we are all living through a pandemic, that was the way in, that was the similarity and the way to build empathy toward these historical characters. So we used the iceberg analogy format, where we designed an iceberg analogy around the pandemic and also one around Marin ship, and showed the ways that they intersected. For example, 10% of an iceberg is above the surface. So what were the things that were above the surface for the war, and what were the things that are above the surface for the pandemic? And how were those things similar? And likewise, 90% of an iceberg is below the surface. So what were those things that related to both the war and the pandemic? So we just did a brainstorm session with a whiteboard, and everybody just called out things that they could think about, and we filled in the iceberg. They came up with things like, for the 10%, frontline workers, because these are the things that are very visible, that are primarily in awareness, the things that you can see happening. So frontline workers, lockdown, closures, sickness, death, rationing. These were things that we came up with that we could relate to, having going through the pandemic. And these are also things that directly relate to World War II or any war. And then below the surface, the things that are primarily out of awareness, meaning you got to dig deeper to find out about these things. We came up with separation, loss, grief, fear, taking sides, conspiracies, shortages, propaganda. So once we built this foundation of the iceberg analogy, showing the similarities between war and the pandemic, the young people were more able to grasp how they could relate to what had happened 70 years ago and what's going on now. And from there, we started building the stories and building each character and writing the scripts, the monologues and the dialogues. And it was very interesting because many of the students had direct connections to people that had migrated from the South back during the Marin ship era. They had grandmothers and grandfathers and uncles and aunts, and the stories are still being told in Marin City now. So this was very exciting for them to directly connect with history and their own historical family stories. So we, somehow we had it done. We had to work very fast to get the scripts finished so that the other tracks could do their work. And it was quite exciting. I was very happy to be a part of this project, and I'm hoping that it can be replicated in many other communities, because as we all know, there are so many undertold and untold stories in American communities all over the country. So it was a pleasure to be involved with this. Thank you.
Thank you, Anita.
Mm-hmm.
You. We're going to go to Leslie.
Hi, can everybody hear me? Okay, that's good. So my name is Leslie Palais, and I'm an animator and 3D modeler, and I worked with Tim Bartoff, and we were responsible for the 3D content creation track. So we used a industry standard 3D software that is actually an open source. And the wonderful thing is we picked a software that is available to anyone, so that you didn't have to purchase this if it was something the students wanted to continue on their own after this summer program. And the students were responsible for then taking the narration part that Anita's track did to find assets that would help build this 3D world, to create an environment that reflected what the housing would look like, what the Marin shipyards would look like, and the ships. And so not only did the students have to learn how to create 3D models with the package Blender, they had to do historical research to make sure that the assets that they were creating were actually applicable to the time that the story was being placed. So it was amazing on how well the students picked up some of the 3D modeling, and a lot of them didn't have any experience with the 3D software package. And by the end of the third week, we had students helping other students. So it was peers helping their peers to be able to get their models created, and it's called textured, which is like putting materials on, sort of like taking a metal car and then painting your materials on afterwards, so that it looks like a high sense of realism that you can then take your 3D models and put into a VR setting using a game engine called Unity. That then allowed all of the students to see all of their pieces that they individually picked, put together in a scene, so that it could help create a visual component to the narration of the characters. What I was really impressed with as well is how well the students all gelled within each other and the department of the 3D modeling track. To if they didn't have an answer, they couldn't always come to the teachers. They would find a way to use resources either online or within each other to solve some of the 3D problems.
I remember one of the things when they were talking about what artifacts to put in the houses, in 2 or 3 of this, they had a hard time understanding there were no phones in houses.
Yes.
During World War II. They said, how do people live then?
Yeah.
Way
Yeah.
before cell phones, but what it brought to me was making that history alive, because the students were involved in finding that out by doing something completely remote to it, like finding a 3D model. So that was pretty
Yes.
good. Can you talk a little bit about the character animation, Leslie?
Yes. So we had 4 characters that were chosen that had a huge significance, and the roles that they played in Marinship. So the 4 characters were created using a program called Maya, but then the students were responsible for taking those characters and then using a 3D blender using Blender to try and create animations that went with the narration, which is quite a feat to do in 3 weeks, to have characters created, textured, animated, and then have the audio track synced to the character. So we picked two female characters who were welders. We picked 2 male characters, the Reverend Leon Samuels and Joseph James. And it was great to have the narration track do so much research that it allowed the 3D track to already have a basis on what the personalities were going to be for the 3D characters.
So what we're looking at here, what are we looking at here on this screen?
So on the screen, we've got one of the characters created out of Blender, and that is Rodessa wearing one of the welding helmets, which was also one of the assets that students had to create. So they also had to do the research to find out what welding helmets looked like at that time. And we had to do research on what the working outfits looked like at the Marin shipyards. So we had started with yellow, but then we discovered that most of the welders had either a dark navy blue, sort of a dark blue, or a dark green. Then painters had a light blue. So sometimes the suits had to reflect what their job was during the Marin shipyards. So on the right, we have Ms. Annie Small, my apologies, Ms. Annie Small, and she was a welder, and she is in this VR narrative is discussing the roles as a welder to a new recruit. And the new recruit is seen through the eyes of ourselves as if we were the new recruit in this VR experience. And Ms. Annie Small and Ms. Rodessa Battles is explaining to us what to expect on your first day.
Okay, we can't wait to see all this in VR. Next up is Jahi and soundtrack, and Jahi and I worked together at the local youth center a long time ago. We got together at the beginning of the summer just to catch up, and we were starting to think about this project. And I said to Jahi, wouldn't it be great if we could have a hip hop soundtrack that went along with the media that they were creating that was relevant to the World War II, be kind of like Hamilton West, maybe. So Jahi, take it away.
Yeah, John and I have an album coming out next year, so look for that. The way I want to start is the first thing I want to do is I want to shout out Sarah, Jalea, Ramon, Cameron, Dominic, Brianna, Brenda, Nicholas, Elisa, Tayana, Kyrie, Bella, and Asia, and Mason as well too, because these were the young creatives that we work with. And I think without them, we would have had a really, really tough time. And then I would be remiss if I didn't say that Leslie also did a very incredible Photoshop class where she gave young people an opportunity to really touch Photoshop for the first time. And I really thought that it was a great addition to see how those 21st century skills could be used. as John said, he asked me to put together a soundtrack. And the first thing I had to do was really preload myself with information about the history of Marin City. I had some history with Marin City in the past because as a hip hop artist, we know Tupac lived in Marin City. And I did some legacy work there around his life prior to meeting John. But I still really I never really understood how African Americans were in Richmond, in Marin City, and other places. So I just really got to work and did my homework because I realized that the more I could preload the information, then it would be easy for me to be able to identify themes, characters, get a sense of the time period. So I was able to communicate that to the young creatives. And my process is always first by starting community. When I talk to the young people, I let them know that this was project-based. They were not in summer school or summer camp. I wanted them to feel like they were creative employees on a musical set or a film set or a production set. And every time I got a chance to interact with them, I always share one tidbit about something about Marin City, about their area, and about the project itself. And actually what I was doing is really preparing their palette to be able to do something they've never done before. And I think it's really important to say that these young people really didn't, for my soundtrack, and I think overall, they had never had an experience with VR. They had never done research and turned around storytelling for VR. And they also had never recorded before. Most of these students had never been in a studio, had never wrote a rhyme. I think Cameron was a poet. So Cameron had done written poetry, but he had never been in the studio. Chris Jeffries, who was the engineer that John recommended, great young man that spent time at the New School in New York City, who's at a mastering house in Los Angeles right now. This was his first project of being able to record multiple voices at one time and then also mixing a project. So it was really a complete learning by doing experience. So once we got into the preload in the community, what I realized is that Mr. Joseph James, Reverend Leon Samuels, Miss Annie Small, and Miss Rodessa Battle being our main characters, I wanted to dig into their lives, find out biographies. I talked briefly to the granddaughter of Miss Annie Small, who was in who's actually is still in Marin City. And then my process is that I actually work with every young person that was in our summer project. And every time they would come into the studio, there were three things that I wanted to do. One, I wanted them to feel as comfortable as possible doing something new, and also encourage them that they could do it. Two, they help with a variety of ways of writing. They would either finish sentences, they would look at a concept and say, well, this is what we should say about it. They actually were also doing accompany ad libs. That's the vocals behind main vocals. They also were doubling their vocals. And again, I also taught them some microphone mechanics. Never been in a studio, they know how to put headphones on. So to learn the mechanic of putting a headphone on, getting in front of a microphone, being able to use your diaphragm to speak from was a process. And what I really appreciated about the young people was that everybody said, I'm not going in the studio. I'm not doing that. That's not what I'm going to do. And all of them learned and had a great time in that process. For example, with Joseph James, I had Cameron and Sarah. I had an idea of where the song could go, but I left open spaces. So I'm glad to be talking to librarians because the idea of literacy was front and center the entire time. We had to, again, I think, I did a word count and I think it ended up being somewhere around 2,900 words that was ultimately used for the 6-song EP. So they were filling in spaces and then also coming up with their own lines as well too. Equal rules in life, I think about Kyrie. He told a story about inequality in his classroom at school, and then he brought that to the song. So Wonder Women Workers was a very important song to do because when all of the shipyards, not just Marin Ship, but Richmond and Kaiser, they really were not hiring women. But by the time World War II, by 1945, there were a large number of women that were working in all of the shipyards especially in Marinship. And it was vital to be able to lift up a story that would tell the story of the power and the courage of those women, centering around Miss Annie Small and Miss Rodessa Battle. Marin City was a song that I definitely had already heard, and the music was produced by Chris Jeffries. And I wanted Felicia Gaston of Performing Stars of Marin, who's the culture keeper of Marin City, just to be able to talk and share about what, why this is important, why this community is important. Joseph James, I could talk about Joseph James all day because he was not just a welder, he was an incredible playwright. And the process by which, what I learned from the young people was that every day through each of their tracks, they started picking up new information around the project. So when they got a chance to get into the studio, it was an opportunity to be like, to place it where they felt. I think about Jalea. She said, yeah, I want to do something for Wonder Women workers because now I know something about Miss Annie Small. Reverend Leon Samuels, Dom was instrumental in that. He suggested that we tell a story of him coming from Louisiana to the Marin ship. And I love how Dom at the end of the soundtrack really promotes and shouts out his wife as well. So again, we went through a project-based learning. The one thing I will say for me professionally, the way in which I approach my work with the young people was I treated them as if they were just music industry professionals, despite whatever experience they had or did not have. And then also spent a lot of time making sure I would encourage them and let them hear themselves back. I think it's always it was a dynamic process to watch them hear themselves back for the first time, to hear their voice and then realize that they actually were taking small pieces, small rhymes, small phrases, and they were turning into full composition. So I thought that was really incredible. And yeah, I still work with these young people. They will be part of Marin City 80. And for those of you who want to see the VR, shameless plug, November 13th is our world premiere. But also today there was a feature on the young people from Marin City, the Marinovators, on KQED, where they talked about their unique experience learning, having this summer experience, how it made them feel and how it made them grow. And the song, the album itself, the Marinovators, A Way Out of No Way, is available everywhere you stream music right now.
Okay, thank you, John.
That was 6 minutes, John, 6 minutes.
Thank you, John.
I don't know what to say. You saved more time for Chantel. So the way that this was actually brought to me was by a woman, Deborah Rosen, who moved here from South Carolina and called me up and said, yeah, I've been talking to Felicia about doing something this summer. And it was at the same time I was trying to think about what we would do in the XR Academy for the summer. So she was telling me about her project that she had started and completed in South Carolina. Why don't you talk a little bit about that, Deborah?
Yeah. So after the Mother Emanuel murders in Charleston, the community there really wanted to be more proactive in terms of social justice education. So Charleston Digital Media was a nonprofit created to develop social justice virtual reality education opportunities. And we focused on this most consequential civil rights case, Briggs v. Elliott. It was a case where a hidden figure, African-American plaintiffs from Clarendon County, simply wanted to enforce the prevailing law of separate but equal by requesting buses for their, the African-American students equal to the white students. And Thurgood Marshall represented them, and many of them risked their lives and livelihoods just because they filed the case. The judge in the case, Judge Waring, convinced Thurgood Marshall to fight the prevailing separate but equal law and state that it was unconstitutional. And this was a big risk at the time. So this case was lost in the South Carolina federal court, but that allowed a direct appeal to the United States Supreme Court, and several of these cases were folded into one, resulting in Brown v. Board of Ed. And my partners, Tars Ludwigson and Elliot Lewitt, and I created a virtual reality experience about the case. Boeing, the South Carolina Bar Foundation, the Convention and Visitors Bureau, along with individual donors, funded the project. We saw two opportunities at once. First, that hidden history was virtually unknown in the African American and white community in Charleston, except for lawyers who had studied it in law school and historians. But it also allowed an important history lesson to be taught and to create an opportunity to teach students just rudimentary aspects of virtual reality who had no educational opportunity to do so. This experience, thanks to Leslie and John, who helped enormously in getting it finished with our team, this experience is going to be placed at the Charleston Visitor Center, which has millions of tourists. We really wanted this to be able to create a pilot program, due to the horribly lack of technology awareness in our state government there. And we believe that the actual experience that we now can show, will have a positive effect on legislators and their attitudes for educational programs. I was really fortunate in meeting John, who pulled this whole team together and realized that the advanced state of technology education in California far surpasses South Carolina. So he immediately jumped into action and really brought what was originally envisioned with us to the table here. And I just look forward to working with John to create, statewide opportunities in California.
Thank you, Deborah.
Thank you.
One of the parts is you can see the picture below it is our website, which is XR Lost Stories. And the tagline says it all. I mean, every community has a lost story. So from that, we went to Chantel Walker, who's the Assistant Deputy Director here in Marin County and also the head of CRE, which she'll tell you a little bit about, and asked her about it. And they were able to support us and look at it as a scalable project for libraries here in California. You want to talk a little bit about that, Chantel?
Absolutely. Thank you. Yes, I'm Chantel Walker, Assistant Director over at Marin County Free Library. And I think that there are three huge pieces of intersection for libraries and the library community. And for those of you who were part of cultivating racial equity and inclusion in California libraries, we call it CREI in Spanish for I believed. You've heard this in August when John and I spent some time talking about it. But for libraries, the real opportunity, I think, of the content overall, if it's from your community or another community, really is it integrates our public services, our collection development, how we display items, and it integrates our archives, because some of this information in communities will come from archives, and it also integrates technical services as we add things like VR. For cultivating racial equity and inclusion, one thing that we see going forward for 2 years, as a team, the co-creators of CREI worked together so that we could learn together, share information, have cohorts that focused on specific library systems. But the broader goal was really to catalyze a network of libraries who internally and externally were working on equity broadly, but starting with racial equity, since racial equity is still the greatest predictor of life outcomes for people in our country. And when we did that process, the first piece that we were working on beyond the vision for racial equity in your library was a racial equity history of your community. And so in the first year, we were working with 21 libraries, the second year, or library systems, the second year, 25. And every community unearthed things about the racial equity as well as inequity history of their community that they didn't know, either as library professionals, which, often we're the information people and we feel like we know or would know, or things that they would like to share. But coming up with handles on how to share important information was very challenging. So for some communities, they found things like housing discrimination, and being in Marin, there were huge amounts of that. Or they found that there were sundown towns where after a certain point in the day, after the classic working hours, people of color, Black people, Latino people were not expected to be in those towns anymore because only white people lived there. So thinking about how do I engage my community in important topics about the different racial and ethnic histories of our communities was something that we were thinking about, working on, struggling on, and we had the content about. So in talking with John and XRLibraries, they've been longstanding partners of our library, and we're co-located together in Novato for one of our branches. We were really thinking about the value of this work, and as everyone's talked about, for young people, history, but also from the cultivating racial equity in libraries perspective, as library communities, as information people, how we bring our communities into the conversation about race and racial equity in digestible and relevant ways. In addition, as I mentioned, 21 libraries one year, 25 another, had done this research on a timeline about racial equity. So have key highlights in their community. Certainly, there's the possibility to go deeper, but with that, we see this as starting points. And as the co-creators of CRAE re-envision, what's the next piece of building momentum in libraries for internal racial equity work, as well as external racial equity work and equity work more broadly with our public? We see this work as a great entry point. What it also does is keeps technology relevant in communities that don't always have a voice. The untold stories build cultural pride, and we envision the idea of book displays and material displays and places on our websites that can really talk about the depth of this history. For some libraries and library systems, I often say the collection is like the spinal column of libraries. For some libraries and library systems, having this kind of content will help them build out a whole new section of their collection. For others, the idea of working with young people, creating soft skills, we really have an opportunity here with those skills to keep not only our community connected, the broader adult community, but to serve young people. So we absolutely see scalable opportunities for working with the team. And as one of the other co-creators of CRAE and I are talking about what the future looks like, it includes this work.
Thank you, Chantal. And so one of the things that we're working on now is coming up with a scalable version for other California libraries, but also, as you see on the right here, you see an equity and diversity playbook. A lot of the things we do for libraries put together playbooks of different apps that relate to a theme. And this one we did over the summer with Sonoma State interns, and that was, in there is a bunch of apps that relate to traveling while Black in the 60s. Being underground, all these things that relate to diversity and equity. And so now we're really looking at how do we incorporate the Briggs and Elliott and the Marin ship into a social justice playbook. And our first step with that will be to incorporate it into high school history class, social justice classes in the spring of 2022. But from there, we're looking for other communities and other libraries that would like to be involved with us on this. And so I reach out, and it's been a very good event for the community of Marin City because you have the youth that were involved in, and as Jahi pointed out earlier, we're having a large community event unveiling on November 13th, where we have the shopping centers contributing resources, the communities contributing resources, the libraries involved. So everyone's involved in finding out about this and sharing their thoughts and feelings about it. So we welcome all of your input. I don't know, we have any time for questions, Kathy?
We're just at time. So if people want to email you guys with questions or follow up in some other way, or if you want to hang out in the chat, I'm sure you can answer questions that way.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks everyone for being here, and we look forward to talking to you in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.